Hey, call me Louis. This is my spot. LuiSpot.
I think when one wants to assess international relations, the first question you want to ask yourself is, what does the structure of the international system look like? I was born in 1947 during the Cold War, and we lived until 1989 in a bipolar world. There were two great powers on the planet, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War ended, and then we moved into a unipolar world. And I would imagine most people in the audience came of age during the unipolar moment when there was only one great power in the system, and that was the United States of America. That world went away in roughly 2017, and we now live in a world where there are three great powers. The structure of the system has an enormous influence on how states interact with each other, and it has an enormous impact on globalization. During the Cold War, when I was young, there was really no globalization, in large part because there were two different worlds, the communist world and the Western world. And people in Hungary lived in a communist order or a Soviet-led order. Hungary belonged to the Warsaw Pact. It didn't belong to NATO. What then happened is the Cold War ended in 1989, and you had a unipole. And once you have a unipole, you get globalization, because the United States runs around the world running things. It creates a global economic order. It brings countries like Russia and Hungary, Russia for a while, Hungary up until this present day, into this globalized order. But what's happened is we've left unipolarity and we moved into multipolarity. And what you see happening is that globalization, that global order, that liberal international order that existed during unipolarity has fallen apart. And what you're getting is a new order. You're seeing a country like China trying to influence the order by building its own institutions, by shaping how states interact with each other through organizations like BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative. So what I would say is that moving forward, you're not going to see anything like that globalization that you saw during the unipolar moment, in large part because the foundation has changed. We've gone from unipolarity to multipolarity.
And what I don't agree with the previous speaker about, I don't think it's inevitable we've moved into a multipolar world. What I think happened was the West actually enabled the rise of China by allowing China into the World Trade Organization, by allowing China essentially to flout the rules of trade and cheat the system. And what I think we're now seeing under President Trump is a pushback against the way that the system was undermined and sabotaged. And it wasn't just sabotaged by our adversaries like China or Iran, it was also sabotaged from within. So whether it was the woke movement, whether it was the environmental extremists who, have imposed massive costs on countries like Britain through net zero. If you look at Britain if you look at Europe versus the United States, we had almost caught up in terms of GDP per capita with the United States by the year 2000. We are now 50% worse off. And that is largely due to our energy policy, which has been terrible, our regulatory policy and our tax policy, and the massive size of European welfare states. So if you're looking at what is the cause of the decline of European power, the primary source is economic. And that has followed on to not enough investment in our defense capabilities, not enough technological competition. If you look at where all the big technology companies are coming from, very few of them are coming from Europe. And if they do come from Europe, ultimately they end up getting capital in the United States. So what we have seen over the last 25 years is a massive decline in relative European economic and security power. And frankly, Britain is a part of that decline. We started declining earlier. Between World War I and World War II, you could see a real decline in British power. And we have not regained that, but what I think is you've seen since the 1990s an increased acceleration as European countries have decided, with the possible exception of Eastern Europe, because they were under communism and understand why communism is a bad thing. But certainly if you look at Western Europe, you've seen high regulation, high welfare state, chasing after policies like net zero that have damaged our energy security and damaged our industry, and we are now in a much weaker position.
I think the last round of globalization, which has been about 30 years, maybe 40 years, had, of course, generated tremendous amount of economic prosperity and wealth. And China certainly was one of the largest beneficiaries of this globalization. And so has the United States been. Both of our countries' GDP went up significantly. China went up a lot more because we began at a lower base. But the problem with globalization as it stands is, I think, it cannot go on for two reasons. One is, I think, within the United States and the West, somehow the economic benefits derived from globalization weren't distributed in a way that satisfied multiple segments of its population. So it's led to an internal revolt against globalization. So the architect of this first round of globalization is having internal resistance to it. So that's, of course, leading to deglobalization, because the leader of the globalization was saying, we don't want to do this anymore. And the second issue is, of course, the largest developing country that participated in globalization was China. And in the beginning, I think they had designed it in a way that the US and Western countries were at the core of globalization, and there were countries, developing countries, at the periphery. And the division of labor was clear. You know, the US and Western Europe were going to be in charge of R&D and finance and military, and we're going to do cheap labor and sell natural resources if we had them. China didn't have them, but others had them, and provide market. But of course, as China grew, it said, no, we didn't agree to that. We're going to move up the value chain. And unfortunately, the US and certain Western countries, they thought this, perceived that as a threat. So they didn't want to do that anymore. So I think we're in, globalization is in trouble. But let me also comment on the liberal international order. I'm not sure where that came from. Certainly when China signed up to the WTO, it wasn't told it was signing up to the liberal international order. It wasn't such thing. I mean, I think it was made up in retrospect. I mean, I think when President Jiang went to Washington, when China was trying to enter the WTO, President Bill Clinton didn't say, hey, President Jiang, you're signing up to the liberal international order. It didn't happen. So it was never there. So that's my 2 cents.
Eric made the point that both China and the United States got much richer during the unipolar moment when we had globalization, and he's of course correct. And the United States didn't care about that, because the United States thought that once China got really rich and it got embedded in international institutions, it would become a responsible stakeholder, to use Robert Zoellick's term, and then it would become a democracy, and once it was a democracy, we'd all live happily ever after. This would be the end of history. That was the basic idea. But it didn't turn out that way, because once China got really powerful economically, it translated that economic might into military might, and it began to throw its muscle around. And this, of course, scared the living bejesus out of the Americans, and the Americans have moved to counter China. We now care about relative gains. See, Eric was talking about absolute gains where we're both getting rich. And we didn't care about relative gains then. But now that China's a great power, we care about relative gains. So what we want to do is we want to maximize American growth, and we want to minimize Chinese growth. Anything we can do to slow down the Chinese economy and refurbish the American economy, we will do. And you see this reflected in the competition over cutting-edge technologies. We're extremely scared that China's going to beat us in terms of developing cutting-edge technologies. Now, where do tariffs come in? Tariffs are part of the story. What we're trying to do with tariffs is modernize, refurbish the American industrial base, make us much more competitive, and we're trying to weaken China at the same time. Because again, we care about relative power. And all of this is to say that I agree with you, Liz, that we made a fundamental mistake in the 1990s and in the first 20 years of the 21st century in helping China to become Godzilla. It's come back to haunt us, and we're now trying to rectify that. And again, tariffs are part of that story.
Of course, like I said, both countries benefit tremendously. But if the United States, certainly the U.S. did not set up the system and ask China to join out of charity. I really don't think so. They thought that they would benefit too. That's number one. Number two, if the U.S. thought that if China develops and eventually it will become a liberal country, they never told us that. Nobody told us that. It was a secret intent. It wasn't disclosed in the prospectus. Okay, we signed up to WTO, and there was a prospectus. There were a bunch of rules, a lot of text, a lot of words, nothing in it that said, hey, if your economy develops, you must become a liberal society. It wasn't there. We didn't sign up to that, like I said. So I think, well, look, if the U.S. is now changing its path, changing its direction, that's completely within its power to do. It's a sovereign nation. Tariffs and all of that, if the globalization, if the United States wants to ditch globalization for its own needs, I think China will adapt. Everybody has to adapt. It's okay. I think China will do okay in this new era, and it will adapt.
I think the way to think about the world we're moving into is to separate the economic from the security competition, and think about it in the context of the pre-World War I period, not the Cold War. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, what is he talking about? Before World War I, here in Europe, there was a huge amount of economic intercourse among all of the states. There was a huge amount of economic interdependence here in Europe. Nevertheless, at the same time, you had two powerful security blocs. One was the Triple Entente, which was France, Britain, and Russia, and the other was the Triple Alliance. Germany, of course, was the key player, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And you had this intense security competition before World War I that, of course, in August 1914, led to World War I. But at the same time you had this intense security competition, you had all this economic interdependence. Fast forward to the Cold War, when I grew up, there was hardly any economic intercourse between the West and the East. So there was security competition, but no economic intercourse. The situation moving forward is going to look like the pre-World War I period. It's not going to look like the Cold War. There's going to be a great deal of economic intercourse between India and China, the United States and China, Europe and China. The key issue inside the economic realm will have to do with high-edge or cutting-edge technologies. That's what the United States really cares about in terms of the competition with China. And just to take Europe and how this competition will affect Europe, there's no question, given the economic state of Europe, that European states will have a powerful incentive to want to trade with China. And the United States will tolerate that as long as Europeans don't trade cutting-edge technologies to the Chinese. Because what the Americans are trying to do, as Eric knows very well, is the Americans are trying to throttle, slow down China's development of cutting-edge technologies. And the United States is not going to be happy if Europe trades cutting-edge technologies or technologies that feed into cutting-edge technologies with China. But nevertheless, Europeans, Americans, Indians, we're going to trade with the Chinese. But at the same time, you're going to have a wicked and very dangerous security competition in East Asia for many, many years moving forward.
I think if the United States wants to contain China through technological means, which is understandable, then I think they're pursuing very mistaken tactics. I mean, I don't understand why. I mean, by cutting off semiconductor, for instance, when Mr. Biden did, and the Chinese were asleep at the wheel for a long time on the stuff. They woke up the Chinese and said, whoa, this is what they could do to us. And listen, we graduate more STEM students than the rest of the world combined. Okay, and we got research dollars more than the rest of the world combined. If you don't think we can lick semiconductor, you gotta be out to lunch. I mean, so I just don't think that's the productive way to go about it. By the way, I totally understand. I think the Chinese understand the U.S. wants to reindustrialize. If I were running the United States, I would want to reindustrialize too. I just wish there could be a friendlier way to go about it externally. And I actually think, that's why I'm actually reasonably optimistic. I actually think the Chinese would be willing to cooperate and maybe contribute to that effort. Certainly China is the largest industrial power in the world. There's some kind of accommodation that could be reached, I believe, if we pursue a friendlier atmosphere.
I very much agree with this. We're going to end up with two competing networks, and in fact I think that's what's already been happening. We haven't talked about the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and Africa, but what has happened is the United States for the last 25 years haven't really been playing on that economic pitch. They haven't been signing new trade deals. They've been allowing China to use the Belt and Road Initiative, use trade to pull more countries into their orbit. And we're seeing what we're seeing with the trade war, which is also offers of trade deals as well. So, people lining up at the White House to sign new deals with the president, is the US re-engaging in that economic battle that had pretty much left the pitch on, particularly during the Biden presidency. Ultimately, and this is where I slightly disagree with the term multipolar, the US is still the most powerful country in the world. And ultimately, I don't think it has been using its leverage for the last 25 years. And that is what President Trump is fundamentally doing. He's saying, I'm going to use the leverage of the US consumer market to get what I want with respect to Europe. So Europe has all kinds of non-trade barriers up against US products. Those can be removed under economic pressure. America can also put pressure on Europe as to what we do with China, and what our economic relationship is with China, and which goods we can or which services can be traded with China. So there is a big opportunity for the US to use its leverage at present. I think within a decade or so, China would have gained sufficiently that that would no longer be possible, which is why I think now is exactly the right time to act. And of course, China isn't going to like that.
I just want to make it clear that I was not arguing that the United States will defeat the Chinese in this economic race or in this arms race. The Chinese are incredibly impressive, and there are all sorts of reasons to think that the United States is in deep trouble and not up for arms racing, either economically or militarily, with the Chinese.
Now, that sums it up for this video. What do you guys think? Share thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. Let's have a proper discussion about this without having me impose my opinions and ideas on this matter. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, so that the YouTube algorithm can know that this video was so much interesting and share it far wide to more avid viewers just like you. Subscribe and click the notification bell if this is your first time watching these videos, and so that you can be notified as soon as we make a new upload on videos just like this. My name is Louis. Until next time, peace out.